Hello and welcome to the HistoryNetwork.org podcast. If you'd like to become a patron of the podcast, we would love you to. And you can do so at patreon.com/the History Network. Thanks to all our patrons who make this podcast possible. The HistoryNetwork.org podcast, Season 37, Episode 2. The Battle of Abritus, AD 251, Part 1. This episode was written by Murray Darm. Murray is an ancient and medieval military historian from New Zealand living in Australia. He has written more than 100 articles on various aspects of ancient and medieval military history, as well as other historical topics from all periods, ranging from the history of opera to the runic alphabet and recipients of the Victoria Cross. He is the author of Macedonian Phalangite versus Persian Warrior, Athenian Hoplite versus Spartan Hoplite, and Leuctra 371 BC, all from Osprey Publishing. He is, of course, a regular writer on here and a regular on the Ancient Warfare podcast. The Battle of Abritus saw the death of two emperors in battle against a foreign enemy, Gaius Messius, Quintus, Trajanus Decius, usually known as Trajan Decius, and his son, and co-emperor Quintus Herennius Etruscus Messius Decius, known as Herennius Etruscus. They lost their lives intercepting an invasion of Goths, led by their king Cniva, as it attempted to leave the empire weighed down with plunder after an immensely successful 2-year raid. Decius was, perhaps surprisingly, the first Roman ruler to die in battle with a foreign enemy. It does tell us that emperors in battle were rare, even if the image of Trajan, Septimius Severus, and even Marcus Aurelius dominate. Most emperors never saw battle. Several emperors had died in battle with domestic enemies in civil wars, and there would be more emperors to die in battle with foreign enemies after 251, but that year marks a turning point. What is more, the loss of two emperors in the same battle with a foreign enemy was a low point, not to be repeated, and the aftermath of the battle was an absolute disaster for Rome. The Goths under Cniva had invaded the empire in AD 250, crossing the Danube at Novae, 4 kilometers east of the modern town of Svistov, Bulgaria, plundering widely and even capturing the city of Philippopolis, Plovdiv, Bulgaria, in the province of Thrace. It may have been betrayed to him by a local magistrate, however. The Roman emperors therefore sought to cut Cniva off as he exited the empire. A remarkable spread of scholarship helps us paint the picture of the campaign, the battle, and its aftermath. The battle took place in the summer of AD 251 near Abritus, near modern Razgrad, northeastern Bulgaria, or Forum Terebroni, or Trebonii from the Greek Phara Thembronia, named in George Syncellus's 9th century Chronographia, in the province of Mysa Inferior. The exact location of the battlefield seems to have been solved only recently. Excavations in 1969 and 1971 identified the battlefield with the site 1 kilometre east of Razgrad. In 2011 and with more recent excavations in 2016, however, the site has been identified more assuredly with a location 15 kilometres northeast of the city, close to the modern Bulgarian village of Trajanovets, shifting it to the valley of the Belai Lom River. the battle may have been fought at sites known locally as Poleto, the field, and Culiata, the fortress, perhaps the site of Forum Terebronii. Many finds of weapons and other battlefield detritus, including coins of the period, have been made at the new site, which all but assures that it was the site of battle. Fragments of helmets and lorica squamata armor, shield bosses, spatha swords, a scabbard, spear heads, spear butts, and the butt spikes of Roman military tent pegs from Decius's camp were all discovered at the new site in the area of Poleto. The site may have been specifically selected by Decius, who had been a governor of Mysa Inferior, Zosimus Historia 1.14, and it offered a flat plain which should have provided ideal terrain for the legions. That was not the way the battle played out, however, although working out exactly how it actually did is a major challenge. Ammianus Marcellinus records that Decius died in a similar way to Valens, that is, his body was not found and fell into a marsh, a detail corroborated elsewhere, although no swamp exists today, although it is sometimes described as swampy. During the Ottoman Empire, a place close to Dryanovets was called Buyuk Gol, Turkish for large lake. As far as we can reconstruct the battle, Cniva must have lured the Romans into pursuing him into the unfavourable terrain of the swamp. This was a Gothic tactic which had been used before and would be used again. Ammianus also brings up Decius's fate at the moment of Rome's disastrous defeat at Adrianople and the death of Valens, essentially equating the two defeats as being as bad as each other. He tells us that the Caesar Decius, we are told, met a similar fate, for when he was fiercely fighting with the barbarians and his horse, whose excitement he could not restrain, stumbled and threw him, he fell into a marsh from which he could not get out, nor could his body be found. Ammianus's book, which dealt with Abritus, unfortunately does not survive. The site of the town of Abritus itself was only identified in 1953, an inscription ABR found at Razgrad. Previously it had been identified with the Zaldapa fortress further to the northeast, an identification aided by a village named Arbit, located close to the fortress. In 1980, a milestone erected by Philip the Arab close to Razgrad was uncovered, stating it was 1 Roman mile, 1492 meters, from Abritus. The Roman city was built on top of a former Thracian settlement in the 1st century AD. Some claimed it was founded by Trajan, but the earliest references date from AD 78, and it became one of the most important cities in the province, although it was first named as a civitas only in the 4th century. It was situated on one of the main north-south Roman roads passing through Sexagintaprista, modern Ruse, Marcianopolis or Marcianople, modern Devnia, Messembria, modern Nesibar, Deultum, modern Debelt, to Adrianople, modern Edion in Turkey. The garrison initially consisted of an auxiliary cohort, cohors 2 Lucentium, named on several inscriptions, the earliest in AD 78. The fortifications of Abritus were strengthened in the early 4th century, walls enclosing 37 acres with 35 towers and 4 gates, but it would again be plundered by the Goths in 376 to 378, and in later invasions, such as that by Attila in AD 447. The number of Cniva's army is given as 70,000 men, Jourdain's Getica 101. This is not an outrageously large number, so may be acceptable. It was, however, only part of his army which he had split into two for the initial invasion. Only the historian Dexippus gives us a strength for Decius's army of 80,000 men, at least equal to the enemy opposing it, the equivalent of 7 full-strength legions and an equal number of auxiliaries. This number is, however, based on full strength. Second-century legions, each of approximately 5,400 men, and by AD 251 the strength of legions may have been greatly depleted, and each legion may have contained less men. By the 4th century we think legions may have dropped to contain only 1,000 men each, in which case the Roman army may have contained many more units. The 3 closest legions, Legio 14 Gemina from Caemuntum, Legio 4 Flavia Felix from Sigidunum, and Legio 7 Claudia from Viminacium, were probably involved along the vexellations from others auxiliary units, and in addition the 10 cohorts of the Praetorian Guard. Probably by the time of Decius each Praetorian cohort consisted of 1,500 men, so 15,000 men in total. An estimate of the 3 legions and the Praetorian cohorts brings us to 30,000 men, or more with vexellations, and with auxiliaries 80,000 men is not an unreasonable number of men involved. Despite the scale of the disaster, we do not hear of a legion or legions being annihilated or disbanded in the aftermath of Abritus. Cniva had taken over as king of the Goths from King Ostrogotha in AD 250, and immediately decided upon an invasion of Roman territory to shore up his rule and assert his authority. Under the Emperor Maximinus Thrax, reign AD 235 to 238, an annuity may have been agreed with the Goths under Ostrogotha, as Thrax was forced to deal with several crises. 238 was the year of 6 emperors. That payment may have fallen into arrears under the Emperor Philip the Arab, and the Gothic invasion of Mysia may have been another repercussion. Decius fought against Philip to become emperor in 249. If Decius had denuded the Danube frontier of troops to fight Philip, then their absence may also have encouraged the invasion, and there may have been other factors too. Some years earlier the Goths, ruled by Ostrogotha, had fought a war with the Dacians under their king Fastida, a war instigated by the latter. The Goths emerged victorious, and the remainder of Ostrogotha's rule, we are told, was peaceful. At the same time, however, neither Zosimus nor Zonoras mention Ostrogotha at all, but Jordanus and Dexippus do. Some historians include the movement of sub-tribes and commanders mentioned under Ostrogotha by Jordanus, Getica 91, as occurring under Cniva, and in his invasion of the Roman Empire. There is no need to do this, even though it means our knowledge remains vague. Jordanus gives us the best and probably most reliable summary of the Gothic invasion, Getica 101 to 103. According to Jordanus, Cniva divided the army into 2 parts and sent some to waste Mysia, knowing that it was undefended through the neglect of emperors. He himself, with 70,000 men, hastened to Eusia, that is, Novae, 4 kilometers east of the modern town of Svistov, Bulgaria. When driven from this place by the general Gallus, he approached Nicopolis ad Istrum, modern Nikiup, Bulgaria, a very famous town situated near the Latrus River, the modern Yantra. Trajan built the city when he conquered the Sarmatians and named it the City of Victory. When the Emperor Decius drew near, Cniva at least withdrew to the regions of Haemus, which were not far distant. Thence he hastened to Philippopolis, modern Plovdiv, Bulgaria, with his forces in good array. Learning of Cniva's withdrawal, Decius also crossed the Haemus mountains, reaching Beroia modern Varia, Greece. There, however, while Decius's men were resting, Cniva fell upon them like a thunderbolt. Getica 102, a description Ammianus would later use of the Gothic attack at Adrianople. Cniva cut the Roman army to pieces and drove the emperor with a few who had succeeded in escaping across the Alps again to Eutia in Moesia, where Gallus was then stationed, with a large force of soldiers as guardian of the frontier. Collecting an army from this region as well as from Oscus, he prepared for conflict of the coming war. Getica 102. Trebonius Gallus, who would succeed Decius as emperor, was consul in 250 and made commander of the army on the Danube in Moesia. It seems clear that Cniva had caught Decius off guard, catching him and his army unprepared at Beroa, when the emperor expected the Goths to still be at Philippopolis. The speed and unexpectedness of the Gothic attack suggested by the comparison to a thunderbolt is telling and would be repeated for the disaster of Adrianople in 378. However, this defeat at Beroa is quickly glossed over or ignored in the sources because of the scale of the disaster that would follow. With the Romans defeated, Cniva then besieged Philippopolis and took it after a long siege, Getica 103. Laden with spoil, he then headed back towards the Danube. Here Jordanus tells us he allied himself to Titus Julius Priscus, the commander in the city, which might suggest how the city fell to Cniva, betrayed by its commander, or a deal was struck. Unfortunately, Jordanus then skimps on details of the battle which followed, Getica 103. In the battle that followed, they quickly pierced the son of Decius with an arrow and cruelly slew him. The father saw this, and although he is said to have exclaimed to cheer the hearts of his soldiers, "Let no one mourn, the death of one soldier is not a great loss to the Republic," he was yet unable to endure it because of his love for his son. So he rode against the foe, demanding either death or vengeance, and when he came to Abritus, a city of Moesia, he was himself cut off by the Goths and slain, thus making an end of his dominion and of his life. This place is today called the Altar of Decius, Decii Ara, because he there offered strange sacrifices to idols before the battle. This suggests that the battle may have been a roving, mobile one. Perhaps both sides identified as the battlefield had a part to play in it. We must turn to our other sources for more detail. Aurelius Victor, Epitome de Caesaribus 29, gives us a summary of Decius's reign, telling us he was from Pannonia Inferior, born at Bubalia, more properly Budalia, modern Martinci, Serbia, and ruled 30 months. Various scholars place the Battle of Abritus in June, July, or August of AD 251, but this detail may help. Decius was elevated to the purple by his soldiers in September 249. 30 months from that gives us February 252. His reign was actually only 22 months long. Further, Aurelius Victor tells us Decius was 50 when he died, that he had made his son Caesar, and was a man learned in all the arts and virtues, quiet and courteous at home, in arms most ready. Aurelius then summarizes, on foreign soil, among disordered troops, he was drowned in the waters of a swamp, so that his corpse could not be found. His son, in fact, was killed in war. Eutropius, Breviarium 9.4, also briefly recounts the reign of Decius, corroborating his origin in Lower Pannonia, his birthplace of Budalia, and that he suppressed a civil war which had been raised in Gaul. He created his son Caesar. He built a bath at Rome. When he and his son had reigned 2 years, they were both killed in the country of the barbarians and enrolled among the gods. We can note that Zosimus gives us an account of Decius's rise to power, not only commanding in Mysia Inferior, but being raised to the purple by his troops for his qualities, and he then fought, as a usurper, against Philip the Arab. This is the civil war mentioned in Aurelius Victor. Zosimus goes on to state that the condition of Decius's troops, though inferior in number, yet the other so excelled it in discipline and conduct that a great number of Philip's partisans were slain, and he himself amongst them, together with his son, on whom he had conferred the title of Caesar. Decius thus acquired the empire. So an emperor and his Caesar dying in the same battle was not unprecedented, although this was civil war. Zosimus's summary of the end of Decius is also useful. He states, Historia 1.15, that the Scythians, he means the Goths, taking advantage of the disorder which everywhere prevailed through the negligence of Philip, crossed the Tanais and pillaged the countries in the vicinity of Thrace. Zosimus must mean the Danube. The Tanais is the modern Don located on the eastern shore of the Sea of Azov, and there was no path to plunder Thrace from there. Many works use the term Scythian to refer to the Goths, Zosimus, Eunapius, and Dexippus, to name but three. It gave them a lengthy historical and historiographical pedigree stretching back to Herodotus. There were, however, no Scythians involved in these Gothic invasions. We can note that Zosimus blames the invasion on the neglect of Philip rather than any aggression or greed by the Goths themselves. It was probably a combination of these factors. Zosimus continues, but Decius, marching against them, was not only victorious in every battle, but recovered the spoils they had taken, and endeavoured to cut off their retreat to their own country, intending to destroy them all, to prevent their ever again making a similar incursion. This is a very different picture than the one in Jordanus. For the pagan Zosimus, Decius is a hero, probably for his persecution of Christians, although he is not explicit in this, and so he apportions no blame to Decius for his defeat, but blames instead his general Gallus and a probably invented conspiracy against the emperor. In this context, however, we are given a more detailed account of the battle. Despite its obvious biases, there may be some useful detail within this picture. For this purpose he posted Gallus on the bank of the Tanais with a competent force, and led in person the remainder of his army against the enemy. This expedition exceeded his utmost wish, but Gallus, who was disposed to innovation, sent agents to the barbarians, requesting their concurrence in a conspiracy against Decius. To this they gave a willing assent, and Gallus retained his post on the bank of the Tanais, but the barbarians divided themselves into 3 battalions, the first of which posted itself behind a marsh, Decius having destroyed a considerable number of the first battalion. The second advanced, which he likewise defeated, and discovered part of the third, which lay near the marsh. Gallus sent intelligence to him that he might march against them across the fen. Proceeding therefore incautiously in an unknown place, he and his army became entangled in the mire, and under the disadvantage were so assailed by the missiles of the barbarians that not one of them escaped with his life. Thus ended the life of the excellent Emperor Decius. We can accept with little difficulty the idea that the Gothic army was split into 3 divisions and that one was posted behind the marsh. We can also accept the idea that the Goths had many more missile troops, especially archers, to bring to bear, and we can note in Jordanus that Decius's son met his end by an arrow. That preponderance of missile troops in comparison with Roman armies would continue into the 4th century. We also have some form of betrayal in Jordanus, but there of Priscus in Abritus rather than of Gallus on the Danube in Zosimus. It may even be possible to combine the details of Jordanus's and Zosimus's accounts without the need for conspiracies and betrayals. Zosimus, however, continues in the same vein, telling us that Decius's successor, Trebonius Gallus, his disloyal general, published an open declaration that Decius and his army had perished by his contrivance. This is highly unlikely, both the initial betrayal and the publication of the declaration. However, it suits Zosimus's purpose to paint Gallus in a bad light, not only for his supposed betrayal, but also because he was a poor emperor in comparison to Decius, in Zosimus's opinion. On the death of Decius, the legions elevated Gallus to the purple. He immediately adopted Decius's other son, Hostilian, who had stayed in Rome, as his co-emperor. He also made his own son, Volosianus, Caesar. Hostilian did, however, die before the year was out, either of plague or murdered by Gallus. Gallus did, however, continue to honour Decius's wife, Herennius Etruscus, which seems to suggest he played little part in Decius's or his sons' deaths. Zosimus's condemnation of Gallus is made not only for his betrayal of Decius, but also because the barbarians now became more prosperous than before, for Gallus not only permitted them to return home with plunder, but promised to pay them annually a sum of money and allowed them to carry off all the noblest captives, most of whom had been taken at Philippopolis in Thrace. The 12th century historian Zonaras surmised that Decius and his son and a large number of Romans fell into the marshland. All of them perished there, none of their bodies to be found, and they were covered by mud. It is of interest that, unlike in Jordanus, where Decius's son fell first and then Decius was drawn into the swamp, here both perished in the marshland. In the essay of Lucius Cecilius Firmianus, known as Lactantius De Mortibus Persectorum, on the deaths of the persecutors, the author also gives vent to his opinion on Decius in chapter 4, who among Christian writers was remembered more for his persecution of Christians than for anything else. The Christian apologist Lactantius became an advisor to the emperor Constantine and a tutor to his son Crispus. Lactantius tells us that Decius appeared in the world, an accursed wild beast to afflict the church, and who but a bad man would persecute religion. Given the tenor of his attack on Decius for the emperor's persecution, it's unsurprising that he reports the emperor's death in a spiteful and gloating manner, having undertaken an expedition against the Carpi, who had then possessed themselves of Dacia and Mysia. He was suddenly surrounded by the barbarians and slain, together with great part of his army. Nor could he be honoured with the rites of sepulture, but stripped and naked he lay to be devoured by wild beasts and birds, a fit end for the enemy of God. We can note, however, that he does not mention the swamp or the death of Decius's son. Only Lactantius gives the detail of the people of the Carpi as the specific enemies of Decius. Zosimus includes them in one passage with other tribes, the Barani and Urugundi, at 1.16. Zonaras gives the most information on Decius's attitude to the Christians, suggesting that it may have been his hatred of Philip, who he says revered the Christians, that led to a persecution of them. Several other sources, however, say that Decius's hatred of the Christians was his reason for removing Philip. Zonaras adds that Decius died most shamefully, because when the barbarians were plundering the Bosphorus, Decius engaged them and killed many. When they were hard pressed and offered to surrender all their loot if they were allowed to withdraw, Decius did not give in, but posted Gallus, one of the men of the Senate, on the route of the barbarians, ordering him not to let them pass. But Gallus, betraying Decius, proposed to the barbarians that, since a deep swamp was nearby, they deploy there. When the barbarians had so deployed and turned their backs, Decius pursued them, and both he, with his son, and a multitude of Romans, fell into the swamp and all perished there, with the result that their bodies, interred in the slime of the swamp, were not found. This is a unique take, and one which does not marry with the other sources, but makes the anti-Christian Decius also guilty of hubris for not accepting the enemy offer to retire without their plunder. It also ignores Gallus's previous military career, making him only a senator, although Zonaras too has Gallus betray Decius. Zonaras's version of the betrayal is, however, more concrete. Zonaras also skips over details. His "after they had turned their backs" implies a battle of feigned flight, drawing the Romans into the swamp. Other sources also give glimpses which may help, but also may confuse the issue. John Malalas's chronicle, written in the 6th century at Antioch, and the 7th century Chronicon Paschale state that Decius and his son fought the Franks, not the Goths, and that both were murdered by one of the exarchs at Abritus. This is probably a mistake for Abritus, although the word Abritus means sanctuary. One of the exarchs is sometimes rendered as one of the prefects. Whether this was Gallus or the Priscus of Jordanus is unclear. It might also be that the term refers to Cniva, since Greek and Latin terms were often applied to what were seen as barbarian equivalents, although it is peculiar they don't use the term king. Malalas also states Decius was 60, not 50, and reigned for only 1 year and 8 months, although that is closer to his historical 22-year reign. And we will pick up on the second part of this story in a couple of weeks' time. Thanks once again, Murray, for writing that episode for us. If you'd like to have a go at writing an episode for us, or you want to contact us and give us an idea for a subject that you think we've not covered yet, then just drop us a line, info@thehistorynetwork.org for that. And once again, please do consider becoming a patron of the podcast at patreon.com/thehistorynetwork. Once again, thank you to all our patrons who make this podcast possible. Thanks again for listening. You've been listening to the historynetwork.org podcast, written by Murray Darm, read by Nick Barker.